I just wanted to show you something. This is what happens when you get into this business. This was probably one of the most exciting moments in my career. That's my satellite. That's CP2, and the picture was taken by AeroCube 2, which was another CubeSat. So they came out together of the deployer, and they took a picture, and then they sent it to me, and I started screaming, and they said, but you cannot share it with anybody. And I said, why can't I share it with anybody? Because it's classified, and if you share it with anybody, I'm gonna get in trouble because I shouldn't have sent it to you. The excuse was, I need to send it to you so you can identify your satellite, so I know where the satellite was pointing when it took the picture. And I'm bringing that up because that's an example of how archaic and entrenched the whole bureaucracy of space was. At that time, any space-to-space photography was classified beyond top secret. This was a secret because it's a very, very dangerous thing to show. So that was one of the big things that we had to change. So be happy that that is no longer the case. We have gone to a rational thing. A lot of people think of space as like, oh, it's rocket science, it's all very different, very special. That's not true. It's all normal. We have fun, we take pictures, we can show them to our friends, and everything, I think is good. But I wanted to show you that was pretty cool. Okay, so I want a couple of definitions because a lot of people say, oh, you invented CubeSats. And one time I thought, what the heck did we invent, you know? So let's get two things clear. There is invention and then there's innovation. And invention is something that was never there before, and innovation is an improvement on something that already existed. And what I want to talk about today is that I think what happened was a lot of innovation, very little invention. And I think young people get scared with, I need to invent something. And that's really hard. You have to come up with something. You don't. You have to innovate, and that's a different thing. And it's a lot more frequent than inventions. So now we have definitions. So we invented CubeSat, Bob Twiggs at Stanford and myself, we invented CubeSat, whatever the heck that means. Well, this is what it means. We had a spec, one page, and we had a box where we put the satellites inside. That's it. That's all we did, okay? What was new? Was this new? It's 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. Woohoo! That's impressive. Was that new? I don't know. There were no new discoveries. There were no new equations. We didn't have any theorems. We didn't write any papers that everybody references, you know, the seminal space paper that Jordi put out. No, we put out this page. And it was a revolution, okay? So that's interesting. The concept of standardized transportation was completely established by the time we arrived. The concept of a jack-in-a-box has been around for a while. You just put the spring, open the box, and the thing comes out, which is exactly how this works. Opal had deployed little satellites from a bigger satellite. That was something that Stanford had done before. It was not new. We just grabbed a bunch of ideas that were out there. The big thing that changed is we were using this in the space industry, which was an industry that was famous for saying, we are rocket scientists, you, the rest of the world, are wrong. And you don't understand because it's very difficult, it's very complicated. We're the only ones that can understand. So the things that really were important is we had frequent access to space. We managed, this is the thing that took a lot of work and that really was important, is we put CubeSat dispensers in every single rocket in the world, almost. We created a long-term standard. We grew from 1 use to 3 use to 6 use to 12 use to 16 use. But today, if you have a 10 by 10 by 10 single U CubeSat, it's compatible with every single deployer in the world. And you can go talk to Exolaunch, talk to Maverick, and they'll launch it for you because it's a standard and it's still around 25 years later. And that was really important. And the other thing that we did, and this is something that I talk about a lot and people don't realize is we basically isolated the developers from cost, risk, and effort. Once you have a standard accommodation on a rocket, putting your satellite in that rocket is a lot easier. You don't have to do your couple load analysis. You don't have to figure out where you're going to mount it. You just build it to the spec, and you know it can go into space. That took a lot of effort out of the people that were developing the satellites. The risk part was really important because the rockets didn't want to launch small satellites because they were very dangerous, because there's so many cases in which the small satellite has exploded and destroyed the rocket, and if you can find one, please let me know, because I haven't. But that's what they were all worried about. And we said, okay, we'll put it inside a box. It's solid. It cannot come out. And we'll spend $5,000 or $8,000 on the mechanism to open it that is totally space-proven and you're super happy. Are you happy now? Can you let me put my student satellite inside the box? And they say, yeah, now you're safe. And that really was important. So that isolation, I said core isolation, was very, very important. So we did that. Those things are new. And then what happened? Well, you all know what happened, you know, and I stopped. SpaceWorks has predictions for everywhere. But thousands and thousands of these things have gone up. And they have formed the technological basis for all the small satellites that are now called New Space. All the components they're using, all that stuff came out of here. So we had an invention, and as we said, call it an invention if you want to, but we'll see. In 99, 2000, depends on how you count. This was the crazy idea phase. This was useless. These guys are coming up with this crazy idea that will never amount to anything. It will do nothing useful, and it's a complete waste of everybody's time. At that point, a great advantage is that nobody was paying us to do it, so they couldn't shut us down. If they had actually been giving us money, we probably would have stopped because it would have taken the money away. But that's the crazy idea phase. Then we had a learning period, and this is very important. This is what happens when you have a crazy idea and people don't give up and they try things. And then you learn what you can actually do with that crazy idea, and then it works. And by the way, when you talk to people about CubeSats, that's what they see. Very successful standard, it worked really well. They launched many satellites, Planet did all these things, it was great. Nobody remembers all this. You know, this is like a launch every few years and things blowing up, satellites not working. They forget about that. That's too hard. Once we decided these things work, then we had an innovation explosion. Then everybody came in and said, oh, now I can use this for something. And it got really, really interesting. The problem, and the reason I'm talking about this to young people, is that this is very frustrating, okay? You may be doing something that's gonna be great, but you have to don't give up, because if it's moving, even if it's slowly, you never know where it's gonna end up. And at this point, it was revolutionary. It was a brilliant idea, okay? And that is actually something that if you think about it, many brilliant ideas were crazy ideas first. You just have to stick with them for a while. And one thing that I want to point out is in all these things, how many inventions were there? How many things were invented? You know, it's like, we do space observation, we do communications, we do scientific measurements, we use cameras, we use solar cells. Most things are really the same. We didn't reinvent any new things. It was just a lot of innovation and just something for young people to think. So where is that innovation coming from? Why are we seeing innovation in CubeSats, and how can we reproduce that in other areas to help the industry? The first thing that we did is we had this idea, we can launch frequently. We're gonna launch all the time because we can go on any rocket because they all use these standard accommodations. And when we do that, we can also do it relatively cheap because not a lot of mass, the rockets just have to do some paperwork. What happens with that is your risk tolerance goes up. And all of a sudden you try new things. And when you try new things, innovation happens, okay? So you started to see very limited mission designs. We're going to try one thing. We're testing one idea. It's very simple. We can do it really fast. We can do it really cheaply. We can do many of them. Like some companies would do one and then another and then another. Planet, when they were doing their 3Us, every few months they were trying something new. Spire does the same thing. So that was one of the things that happened. And what this enabled is what we call this innovation spiral, where you basically develop, launch, and learn. That was impossible in space. When you had one mission every 15 years, you cannot say, I'll try it, see what happens, and then I'll do it again. Oh, so 30 years later, you're going to do your second try. So now we can have iterative process that are in the order of a few months. If you want to be really fast, you can actually launch something and have another launch 6 months later and make changes and try again. So it's really, really hard. When we went to Russia and we had the first failure, almost all the universities had another satellite flying within a year and a half. And that was unheard of. What else happened? We actually found that there's a bunch of industries that are really innovative that have nothing to do with space. And they were doing really, really good stuff. But the space industry was saying, this is not space, so we're not going to use it. And they were really losing the race because they were falling behind. And we've seen a lot of the electronics now come from automotive because they're resilient, they can take the temperature, they can take the vibrations, and they're cheap because they make millions and millions. But everywhere, I mean, we've had people, peacemakers are like satellites. You have batteries and communication systems and all that kind of stuff, and they live in very bad environments. So all these industries kind of brought their technology, and we injected it into the space industry, which was looking at that technology as, it's not space qualified. So that's the second thing that happened. And then we started having, because we have low cost, we have high launch rates, we have all these new technologies, we come up with interesting missions. And Planet had their let's map the planet once a day, which is kind of crazy, but if you have cheap satellites, you can do it. Geoptic was saying, oh, I can do interference from the GPS signals and get weather data, but you need lots of satellites. Yeah, but if they're cheap, I can do it. Marco did communications on Mars. And it's a mission that lasted 10 minutes, but they're the critical 10 minutes where the thing is going through the atmosphere. It's really important, but I cannot build an entire Mars mission for that. But yeah, I can do a 6U that costs 10 million bucks. It's worth it. I put this one because it's mine, and it didn't fly. But Nanoswarm was the first CubeSat-based full discovery mission proposal for NASA. And one of the problems we had is we were going to look at the moon magnetic field, but we needed to make it to 400 million bucks. You cannot be less. That's the number. So we ended up we had 80-something CubeSats that we were crashing into the moon once a week for 2 years. It was really interesting. But the scientists were very happy. So you can do big things with little satellites if you think about it the right way. So that's why I included it, and because I had fun doing it. So you have new processes, very innovative industries that you can tap into. You have a bunch of new mission ideas now because of that. And the last piece of the pie was young people, and that's why this is important for all of you, that were putting it all together. And you say, young people, who are these young people? Just a spattering, okay? In the space industry, there were no startups, period. The idea that there could be startups and they were not started by somebody that came from JPL and did their own company, by some freaky 20-something-year-old that just came out of university is crazy, okay? But GomSpace came out of Aalborg, first CubeSat launch ever, or the second, and they created GomSpace, and they've done all kinds of crazy things. And Delft, ISIS, they created the quad pack, they did launch of launches, they commercialized components. At Cal Poly, we started TIVAC, which then became Terran Orbital. Then Maverick came out of it, and Lockheed bought Terran Orbital. This is all like young kids. Aalto created Aalto University is in Finland. a known space power, okay? So you have a known space power that has never done much in space. You have a university that has never done much in space. And these 20-year-old students go, oh, let's do radar satellites that weigh 50 kilos. To which the entire space industry said, the physics don't work because you're too small. And the next thing you know, you have the radar images from ISI in your hand. And it's like, what happened to the physics? You know, I'm not a physicist, but clearly the physics work. And somehow these kids figure it out. In Vigo, you had Allen Space, same thing. You know, a bunch of kids come out and do it, which this was new. And this was really scary to the established industry. The old Loral Space Systems was bought by Intuitive Machines. A startup to go do landers on the moon bought the premier geostationary communication satellite company. That means this is over. It's a completely new world. The young kids have won. The dinosaurs are going extinct. Okay, and the last thing is you wrap this all into a well-defined and stable standard. That's what all those kids say, I'm going to invest my time and effort into this thing, and I know 3 years from now I can launch because it's going to be the same, because it's a known standard that I can play with. So this is conclusions, but it's not the end. So don't wait for an invention. Don't sit in your room thinking, I need to invent something, I need to invent something. That doesn't happen very often, okay? But innovating is a lot different, and it's a lot easier, and it happens a lot more frequently. So look at that. Look at existing innovations that are already there. We didn't come up with anything new. We just brought things from other places into a different industry. So look outside your field. And this is actually another thing that has happened. It's a lot of people from the computer industry, from the communications industry, with no experience in satellites say, I want to build a satellite. And they came up with all those ideas. It's like, I didn't know you could do it that way. You know, because the experts are usually not the innovators, okay? Once you become an expert, you've spent a lot of effort into creating expertise on a known thing, and coming up with fresh ideas, it's difficult. So, you know, be careful with the old people. Sometimes we won't tell you the right thing. And then the other thing is that standards are innovation enablers. It's a lot easier to innovate if you have most of things taken care of and you just have to think about 2 or 3 things. This is actually exactly the same in racing. You think about super innovative Formula One teams, those are the most constricted, restricted, and put in a box teams in the world, and they always come up with new ideas. So living within a standard is an important thing, which begs the question, are there any new standards coming out? Because Armengol asked me that, is what's happening. And I'm going to say 2 things. The old standard is still alive and well. Okay? Every transporter mission carries a significant number of CubeSats. So for tech development, for testing things, for trying new ideas, there's still a lot of value in saying, I'm going to go with a known, well-established standard because it's been there for a long time. But now, are we doing new things? And the answer is not really, okay? Why? There's a tendency to optimize. I want the optimum perfect satellite for my mission. And that the standards usually prevent you from doing that because I have to be in this particular box. And it's hard to convince people that it's cheaper if you stick with the standard because you get more launches. Maybe we'll get there. I came up with 2 ideas. NASA came up with DiskSat recently, which is as far as volumetric efficiency and packaging is a really, really good idea. Flat satellites are a lot better than boxes. But they just launched once, so we'll see if it works. The problem is that you need a long-term stable standard. If it sticks around for 10 years, they'll do amazing things, and there'll be thick disks and thin disks, and you'll do all kinds of things. The question is, will they manage to keep the standard alive? And it's also a boom for all the small launch vehicles that really can use that. So let's hope that that one works. The one that's really happening is the SpaceX transporter plates, which are really very loose standards because all they say is like yay big and this much weight. but it's really becoming a standard. Nobody fits between those plates. Either you're a half a plate or a full plate or a quarter of a plate, because that's what flies. And that's another example of, if you have long-term and you get access to space, then it becomes a successful standard, and people build to it because it's an option to fly. But then again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Those are all CubeSats. So that one standard is still pretty alive. I don't think it's going anywhere. Despite a lot of people saying, oh, but if you have bigger satellites, you can do better things. Yes, but if we want to try something new, there's something to be said about sticking with the standard. And then a couple of things for young people, since I knew that there was going to be a few students. The first thing is go do it. I mean, their space is open for everybody. Anybody can get it. You can get into space from political science, from law, from economics, from art, anywhere. There's all kinds of avenues for going there. You don't have to be, and Jordi's new grade is amazing, but that's not the only way to get into space, so all kinds of things. The other one is try. You're young, you can try things, you can fail, and you'll learn a bunch. So take risks and learn from your failures. That's the only thing that is important. If you take a risk and you fail and you don't learn anything, then that's a waste. But if you take a risk and you fail and you learn a bunch of stuff, now you'll do better next time. Okay, there's a saying that says experience is the way to avoid mistakes, but you get experience by making mistakes. So live with that. Innovate. Don't be afraid of crazy ideas. Some of those crazy ideas may be brilliant in 10 years. But if somebody says your idea is crazy, really ask them, why do you think it's crazy? You know, and the physics don't work. Well, do your numbers, and maybe the physics do work if you use the right technology. So questions the experts. That goes back to the same thing. Everything we did could not be done. Okay? Everything. You cannot launch in Russia. You cannot put secondaries on NASA missions. You cannot do useful stuff in a satellite this size. Commercial electronics will not work in space. The cameras are going to fail. You don't have enough power. Everything, nothing that we did could be done until we did it. And it was, I mean, Bob Twiggs had a visit in Japan, and the student said, when you CubeSat, we're going to put a camera. And he said, no, you don't have room for a camera. 3 months later, they send them the first picture, because they use a cell phone camera, which we weren't thinking about. It's like, oh, you're right, cell phones have cameras. And then the last one is, please remember to have fun. That's what this is supposed to be. If you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. I mean, not every day. I mean, there's going to be frustrating times and people you may want to kill. But most of the time, overall, you know, the mean should be fun is being had. And I think that's it. And how did I do time-wise? I'm good? Okay. And then just a couple of things I want to say about the pictures. That's the next satellite we launched. Got a better camera than the one that you saw at the beginning. We made a calendar out of pictures. That's really the innovation, you know. You put the thing inside the box, and then it comes out. That gives you a sense of scale. That's Delta II. That was a medium-sized rocket. And that's where they put us, just a truss in the middle of the rocket. You just bolt it in place and you can go. It's really crazy, the things that we did that could not be done. That was not payload accommodations. And then the last picture, I always show this one because it's really cool. This is the solar panel from the space station. This is university satellites. The same people that say university satellites are dangerous, you cannot put them on rockets, it's really a threat, decided that it was a great idea to launch them from the most expensive and delicate spacecraft in the history of humanity. But of course, so maybe the experts were wrong on that one also. Okay, I'm done. Questions? Tell me we have time for one or two questions.
Thank you, Jordi. Yes, someone wants to ask something, or later in the coffee break also. Any question? Yes, Elena?
Hello, I'm Elena. I wanted to ask you, because you said there were a lot of years of frustration and things not working as you wanted to. Did this start as a side project? When do you decide this is your real job and like you put your full time there?
No, that's a good question. It started. Bob was at Stanford doing student satellites, and I was doing student satellites in Arizona before I moved to Cal Poly. And we both decided that this thing is useless. We'll never get the students to learn what we want them to learn because the satellites take 10 years to build, and we don't have launch options. So, and also the students made the satellites too complicated, and then they never worked well. So we decided, screw it, let's put them in a box where they cannot do anything useful. Literally, we were saying, we want Sputniks. Solar cells and a transmitter, we're good. Because what we wanted the students to learn is integration and testing, vibrations, clean room procedures, putting a satellite together. The students didn't like that. They say, oh no, I want to do useful shit. And they put good stuff in the satellites and did revolutionize things. It was always a side project. I mean, I had my day job, I was teaching classes. I was actually in a very schizophrenic point because I was teaching a year-long design class for our students that were being trained to go to Boeing and Lockheed and all that. So we did geosatellites, we did, scientific missions to the moon, these enormous things using very expensive stuff. And on the side, I was trying to kill that particular kind of satellite. The thing that happened is once we said, let's do this, the students wouldn't let us stop. Okay, the project started as a collaboration between Stanford and Cal Poly that got canceled. It was actually a deployable target for a proximity operations thing. Stanford was doing the proximity and we were doing the target. And they canceled the project, and I went to my team and I said, unfortunately, we canceled the project. We had been working only for like 3 or 4 months. And the student said, okay, so what's the next thing we're gonna do? And I'm like, we don't have it. It's like, we don't care. We're gonna build a satellite. Let's figure it out. And that's really what happened. And the big energy behind all of this was having access to thousands of students around the world that would not give up. You just feed them pizza and satellites come out. So I hope I answered your question. One more, come on. No, you need coffee, me too. Okay, let's do coffee.